So in this video, I'm going to take a simple JUnit 4 test and convert it into a data-driven or parameterized test. The data-driven tests are very useful because it means that we can have a single script, essentially a simple path through an application, and we can parameterize it with data to increase the coverage that we can get from the test. So this is going to be an incredibly simple test. You can see this test at the moment. It basically says, I have a private variable called getVersion, private variable called checkVersion. The test prints out what they are, then asserts that the getVersion is between 1 and 5 inclusively, and the checkVersion is between 11 and 15 inclusively. So if I ran this now, it should pass, but it's not really data driven. We have a set of data, but it's hard coded. We're not incrementing this over the life of the test. So in order to do that, we need to make this a parameterized test. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this test at run with, and we'll make it a parameterized dot class. So this now is a parameterized test. Now it will probably fail. If I run this, yep. So it's telling me that we have no public static parameters method on a class. So I have no actual way of passing data into this. So I need to create a method that will set up the data that we're going to use. So I need to create a method. I'll call it public static version combos, and then I'll parameterize this. Let's make this void just to start with. It needs to return a collection of object arrays, but we'll do that in just a second, and parameters. So IntelliJ has automatically made this app parameters come in from app parameterized to have the import coming in here because we've already imported the parameterized runner. So this version combos method will become the method that returns the parameters. So let's run this test now. It doesn't actually return anything, so this will probably throw an error, but it might give us a clue as to what to do next. Okay, so this is saying that the version combos method must return an iterable of arrays, because what we're doing is the version combos is creating the list of data that we're going to pass in as the parameters or data driving our test. So this needs to be, and I will call it a collection of object array. Now that's just to make it as generic as humanly possible. So let's make this array actually do something. So I'm going to first of all set up the data. So I'm going to make this a list, and it's a list that's going to contain an object array. I'll call this args, and it will be a new array list. Right, let's do the imports, Alt Enter. All right, so now if I just return args, then syntactically everything's correct, but there's no data to pass in. So let's pass in some data here. So rather than hard coding the get version at 1, 15, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have get version iterate from 1 to 5 and check version iterate from 11 to 15, but they're going to be in nested loops. So we'll iterate 25 times. Right, so there we go. So I have created nested loops simply to create multiple versions. So args is a list, and I'm adding to the arg a new object array which contains the get version and the version. So if I run this now, will it work? The answer is no, because we have no way of getting this data from the parameters into our actual test. So if I run the test now, JUnit will probably tell me what is going wrong and what we have to do next. Okay. So you can see that this is saying wrong number of arguments. And the reason for that, but you can see that we've run this test 25 times. So what it's done is it's taken the parameters and it's created all the list with 25 items in it, but we have no way of getting this into the test. And that's because normally when we create test classes, they don't have a constructor. But when we create parameterized tests, we need to create a constructor. So I'll say public, and I will pass in the data. And here we have 2 ints. That's what I'm going to be passing in as my data because that's what's in the object array. So I'll say int get version and int check version. And now you can see why I've got these parameters up here, these fields. So I'll get rid of those hard-coded values. And I will say this dot get version is the version that we've just passed in. And this dot check version is the version that we just passed in. So now I have a constructor on my test that takes 2 integers. These 2 integers are what I created in my object array in the parameters method. And remember, I've put this in nested loops in order to create a list of values which are coming through. So here, each one of these test executions is using one of the list entries. So if I run this test now, what we should be doing is generating a list containing 25 items, which is 1, 11, 1, 12, 1, 13, etc., 2, 11, 2, 12. So we're creating a combination of values in here. Then when the test runs, it will print out what they are and just assert that they're within limits. So this test should pass now, and we'll have created our first data-driven parameterized test. Great, so it all passed, and you can see that when I click on each one of these tests, it says using get version 1 and 11, this next one 1 and 12. So we've created the list of items. And that's what we used to do with JUnit 4 up until I think version 11. But it's not necessarily very readable in the reports. And a lot of people go, well, we need to add extra reporting functionality into JUnit to make it readable. And we don't really, because what we've got is the ability in the parameters to add a name. And here, if I add in 0, and I'll make this better in just a second, and 1. What this is going to do, it's going to change the name of the test from the index in the list of items to the values that we've passed in. So now I'm expecting to see 1 and 11, 1 and 12, 1 and 13. So let's try it and see. I'll run the test. So now you can see that by using the name attribute on the parameters annotation, I can change the name of each test that is executed to give us some indication of the data that's being used in the report. So I'll make this better and just say using combo get version 0 and check version 1. And now this should be even more readable when we come through. So let me run the test. And while this is running, let me explain. So remember, what we've had to do is we've had to give our test class a constructor because we're passing in the data to the class, which means that if I added any more tests in here, it would run all the tests in the class, but they would all be using the same data. Now, to allow the tests to use the data, I have put them into fields. So we pass them in through the constructor, then I've stored them in fields so that the test can access. And the way that we create the data is through a static method on the class, which is annotated with @parameters or @parameterized.parameters. And this returns a collection of object arrays where each item in the collection is an object array. So we can have as many items in there as we want. And the object array is all the values that we want to use. If I wanted to make the test driven from a CSV file, then I could have my versions combo method read from a CSV file. Now in JUnit 5, we have annotations to read CSV files. And there is a library that you can add for JUnit 4 called JUnit Params, which adds that type of functionality in. But this is the most basic approach for creating a parameterized test in JUnit 4. The limitations are we don't have data sources for every test. we have a data source for the test class, and all the tests use the same data, which means that if you want to have multiple data-driven tests with different data, you need to create a class for each of them and add them in. But it's relatively simple once you get your head around, and once you get your head around the notion that you're building a list of object arrays and all your data goes in there, that's pretty much all we have to do to create a data-driven class in JUnit 4. And with later versions of JUnit 4, when we use the name attribute, we have the ability to make our test execution names much more readable for external reporting.